Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, October 28th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's campaign rally last night in the state of New York, a campaign rally in Madison Square Garden that has now been heralded as a racist rally by some in the mainstream media as we come into the closing stretch of the 2024 election cycle, and Donald Trump aims to make his closing argument for the election to pitch to voters why independents up and around the country should vote for him in the 2024 cycle, and it comes at a time where Donald Trump needs really strong results in the early voting numbers and the on election day voting numbers in order to win this election. And as a response, what he gives the voters? A rally that has been dubbed as racist by the comments that were made by a comedian that the Trump team vetted and went through the remarks and put up on this stage and thought nothing of it until the entirety of the internet had full total backlash, including some members of the audience there at the Trump rally against some of these comments that had been made by this comedian. Now, Donald Trump's campaign rally is one thing to say. It was never the right choice to do it in New York City. Obviously, this was meant to be a star-studded event. He had Dr. Phil, Elon Musk, and a whole number of other figures that were meant to attract media attention, to build out what this rally was actually doing. And to be fair to him, right? Rallies don't really make that much of a difference in an election. It does provide voters the opportunity to hear from you, but generally speaking, this is to play to your base, to build up excitement and enthusiasm. And although New York City and New York at large is not at all in play, Donald Trump seems to be focusing on doing rallies in the areas where he can get the biggest amount of audience groups, largely to fill an arena and talk to an audience that's filled with 20,000 people like it was last evening in Madison Square Garden. And now, a lot of the times too, the narrative has been Donald Trump's comments have been racially insensitive. Donald Trump's comments have been made to be offensive, made out to be something that is turning away some swing state voters. But never, ever, ever have we seen in this election cycle something or any election cycle arguably, so close to an election for something as big as this to actually happen. Now, I implore you to just take a look. And Donald Trump's rally, you just Google Donald Trump rally and see what comes up. And you can just take a look at headline after headline. Donald Trump launched his campaign in 2015 by making a number of comments that were immediately characterized as racist by the mainstream media. But by the time we reached the 2016 election, although his tone and rhetoric didn't change dramatically, Donald Trump took on a new persona. You can watch some of his rallies back in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania from 2016, where he explicitly says, my team is telling me to keep up how I'm doing. I'm just doing a little bit better right before the election. Don't deviate. I'm presidential. People are starting to like me. These are the things that Donald Trump learned to do right before an election, but in this cycle, there is something about the Trump team that just does not understand the political world like they once did, does not understand the average voter like they once did, and that is largely playing to the detriment of the Trump campaign. And like I said, one simple Google search around Trump rally historically had not been something that would be consuming all of what we talked about. Maybe in 2015, there was constant coverage of it, maybe in the earlier stages of 2016, but eventually the mainstream media started tuning out these Trump rallies. You didn't really see coverage point after coverage point, especially in the earlier stages of the campaign. Now that we're right up close before the election, every single thing you say now matters. Every single thing you do now matters. And here's what we see from last night. What was meant to be a massive media push to get positive articles out there about the celebrities and the musicians and the actors that were coming out in full support of the former president, people that they thought would benefit them when it came down to the press coverage, when it came down to the surrogate coverage, all of these different things, and yet it was overshadowed by a comedian who referenced Puerto Rico as an island of garbage, who went so far as to, make racial comments surrounding Latinos across the country, made comments around black people across the country. He did a number of things that consumed the oxygen of this rally. And again, as we scroll through, remember, these were comments that were vetted by the Trump team, loaded into a teleprompter, cleared for speaking. And the Trump team is now rejecting these comments, saying that the jokes do not reflect that of Donald Trump or the campaign, do not reflect that of, this style of Republican politics. But in many ways, voters aren't buying it. And I want us to really unpack exactly why something like this matters right before an election. Just going through these article headlines, hateful Puerto Rican comments were made, right? You see Kamala Harris rejecting all of these things. Fallout spreads from racist rhetoric at Trump's, Madison Square Garden rally, right? Quote, F these racists, people coming out in full force, and none other than Bad Bunny. And I know it sounds a bit interesting to say that Bad Bunny is commenting very heavily, might I add, on the current state of American politics. He is an American citizen. He has a lot to say, but he was not too active in the political space for this cycle. But it was this comment in particular, these comments being made against Puerto Rico, propelled by Donald Trump's, candidacy, propelled by Donald Trump's rally. He was given the platform to make these comments, and the Trump team didn't think anything of it until, again, the backlash came out. And now he's endorsing Vice President Harris. And just taking a look at article after article, this is not where you want to be in the final stretch of the campaign period, and you have to ask, although Puerto Rico itself does not have electoral votes, how many Puerto Rican voters are out there? How many of them could genuinely sway the outcome of an election that have been directly targeted by what is now a Trump surrogate and what is now largely seen as a reflection of the former president? And I encourage you to take a look at numbers like these. Now, Politico talks in depth about the remarks and the vulgar comments, and they go through it pretty deeply. But I want us to actually unpack exactly why the fallout is tremendous, especially when it comes down to battleground states. What they have found, Politico sourced this using the U.S. Census Bureau, is that across a number of battleground states, in fact, the core 7 we look at, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada, nearly 1 million Puerto Ricans live in these swing states. And take a look at that Pennsylvania number. 473,000 voters that are Puerto Rican. 473,000, residents that are Puerto Rican. But that matters when it comes down to an election. That matters when it comes down to how people are going to vote on the margins. Nevada, even 35,000. Take a look at that number too, because everything matters in an election as close as this one. And if you don't remember exactly how close elections can actually be, look no further than the most recent presidential, where in a state like Nevada, you saw the difference between the candidates. You saw Joe Biden at 703,000 across the state. That's pretty good. But when you compare it to that of Donald Trump, you're talking a 34,000 vote difference. Well, obviously not saying that these comments that were made are going to be on its own pushing Puerto Rican voters away from Donald Trump enough that every single one of them won't be voting for him. But 34,000, why does that number sound familiar? 35,000 separate. And you take a look, 34,000 separate Biden and Trump, 35,000 Puerto Rican, residents in Nevada. Now, not all of them are registered to vote. You have to acknowledge that. Not all of them are going to vote in this election cycle. But when minority groups in specific are targeted on a national scale, you come to find that voters do in fact sour on those political parties. Just take a look. You have, people all across the country who have felt targeted at different points that have rejected presidential campaigns. There was a whole reason why Hillary Clinton in 2016, using that basket of deplorables comment, really did damage to her in some of these states. Even though not everyone affiliated themselves with the former president, or at the time, what was businessman Donald Trump, it still was hurtful to feel in a way targeted by a presidential campaign. But the Nevada number is the least of the Donald Trump campaign's worries. The fallout in the state of Pennsylvania arguably could be tremendous. And again, remembering how close some of these battleground states are, look at Arizona, 54,000. What was the margin in the state? Less than 20,000. Michigan, 54,000. The margin was a bit larger than that, but that's because Biden won it by 3. Not exactly a good starting point for the GOP. Take a look at Wisconsin. The margin between the two candidates, 22,000 votes. 65,000 Puerto Rican citizens in Wisconsin. In Georgia, 11,000 voters separated Biden and Trump in 2020. 124,000. And in North Carolina, despite being a state that Donald Trump won, when you take a look at the comparison point in terms of who was up, you see that there are far more Puerto Rican citizens in North Carolina than voters that separated Trump and Biden in the last election. But the big one, like I said, is the state of Pennsylvania, which has a massive population, but a voting base in the last cycle, which was the highest voter turnout we had seen in Pennsylvania in over 100 years. We saw that across the state, roughly 7 million votes cast. Nearly 500,000 voters in the state of Pennsylvania are of Puerto Rican descent. 500,000 residents, rather not voters, but residents in Pennsylvania are of Puerto Rican descent. That matters. And so when you're taking a look at the 2024 election, and you're taking a look at what could be the 2024 cycle and what comes down to the battleground states, everything has mattered in this race, but never have we seen a race so competitive, and never have we seen comments like this being made right before an election and that candidate succeed and win said election. Now, I'm not here trying to say that Donald Trump himself went out on that stage and made these comments, but it doesn't help when you have the Trump-Vance placard right in front of you and you are campaigning for this candidate, and the most that the Trump team was saying is that we don't approve of this joke. And then you have Donald Trump Jr. retweeting a defense from the comedian, if you can call him that, a comedian, retweeting it, blasting it out further to the MAGA base, and so it looks disingenuous. The optics on this rally, as much as I hate to really narrow in on individual instances, could be a reason, one of the reasons, that Donald Trump loses the election. Do I think any other rally has made as much of an impact in the past month? No, right? The past month, October 1st onward, even going back to September. I mean, the DNC and the RNC, huge things, right? The assassination attempt, huge thing. But of recent memory and of recent election campaigning from October 1st onward, can you name a single rally that has had a bigger impact on this election cycle? I genuinely don't think you can. And the fact remains that this is something that was an unforced error, right? You're looking at something that could have been prevented on so many different stances. They reviewed the comments, they loaded them into the teleprompter, and they platformed them. And there's also reports out there, and I don't even want to get into it, of how this comedian had originally intended to call Vice President Harris the C word on stage, to which the Trump team said, no, don't do it. But that means they read it. That means they read these things and loaded them in. And again, it just doesn't play to their point that they try to act like they didn't know it. Because now you're starting to see a lot of voters in the Latino music space, actor space, across the country, entertainment space, coming out in support of Kamala Harris, citing these comments in particular. And news spreads like wildfire in this country because of social media, because of messaging apps. All of these things just aren't good things to base votes on in the 2024 cycle. And when you take a look at what we're seeing in the recent polls, the one area where Donald Trump was making consistent inroads in was actually amongst Latino voters across the country. The New York Times recently released their poll. They released their poll in October, saying that Kamala Harris had the smallest lead amongst Latino voters, Hispanic voters across the country in comparison to 2020 and 2016. So when you see that, you have to ask, why is that? Well, on one end, Donald Trump seemed to have been winning over more Latino voters compared to the past two elections. Had seemed to have brought voters over, especially male Latino voters that were looking to vote for the first time or voting in this cycle very differently than they had voted in the past. And yet, the Trump team still finds a way to mess it up. They still find a way to mess up growth in an electorate space that Republicans haven't seen in a very long time on their side of the aisle. It's a really good result that goes to show that Donald Trump's team seemingly was doing things right until they weren't. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like all Latino voters are a monolith. I don't think that, comments surrounding Puerto Rico are going to be the end-all be-all for every Hispanic voter in the nation. But there are voters out there that care. And nationality and pride is a huge thing. When you're taking a look at a Commonwealth of the United States, people are proud to be where they're from. When you take a look at the amount of celebrities that have come out and endorsed Kamala Harris as a result, that is because they are proud of where they are from and reject the comments that were made on behalf of the former president at his rally. These are not things that benefit any one person's candidacy. They only serve to the detriment. And yet, the most we have gotten from the Trump campaign was a simple one-line rejection of the joke, if you can call it that they referenced. And beyond that, nothing more. No consolation for those who had been hurt by the comments. Especially in a swing state electorate, I understand the Trump team is, very against walking back any of their comments, but it's crunch time. I mean, this is not 2015 where you have a year to recover, another James Comey letter to drop for you to recover. This is not that type of election. And because we are 8 days out from the cycle being over, every single thing matters as you start to see more and more voters get to the ballot box, and that's exactly what is happening. Kamala Harris's struggle amongst Latino voters could be reversed in the battleground states by comments like these. It may not make a difference nationally to a point where she's rebounding to the Hillary Clinton high points of the 21st century. But what it could mean absolutely is that she could swing over voters in Pennsylvania, make a targeted effort to take a look at Puerto Rican citizens in the state of Pennsylvania. 473,000 of them to be specific, roughly half, I assume, are registered to vote, just as the standard voter registration rate across the country. That, or even more, actually. I think it's a bit higher. Point being here, the Democratic Party has a lot more footage, a lot more to weaponize against the Trump campaign because, quite frankly, they messed up. They screwed themselves over with that rally, and it could be a piece of the puzzle should Donald Trump lose this election. and I very rarely say that about any rallies. But the fact remains, this rally happened 8 days before the election. This rally happened and targeted minority groups that comprise a significant chunk of the voting base in many battleground states. And it comes at a time, too, where earlier on in the morning, the Kamala Harris campaign had rolled out their plan for Puerto Rican voters across the country. And so that seemed to be a response to those comments. But the juxtaposition is just too strong for the Democratic candidacy, and it goes to show that they're on top of it, and they know what they're doing. Donald Trump's team, not as much. In the final stretch, political knowledge and political instincts will be everything. Saying things right, doing things right, how you do them, when you do them. Donald Trump's team not off to a good start. Kamala Harris's team off to a great start. Now, will it matter? Maybe not. I do think, though, there are voters that will be swayed just to get out to vote to be against the former president because of the comments that were made. I can near guarantee you there are voters out there that are outraged about this today that might not have been voting before, but that are absolutely at that ballot box today, tomorrow, the next day, or some days after that. But at this point, in this cycle, as single thing comes down to the wire, Donald Trump is starting to see the tides turn away from him in a way that we're moving in his direction for the past 2 weeks that might start walking back in favor of Vice President Harris and boosting her candidacy back to being in the favorite. According to the pundits, according to the pollsters, maybe we'll see, but that could happen, especially given that this might be the start to a downward trend for Donald Trump just at the time he needed it least. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.